First half of July 1942. The Nazi doctors performing horrific experiments on live human beings in a perversion of their Hippocratic oath to first do no harm is a mainstay of Hollywood's depiction of the horrors of the German concentration camps. In July 1942, some of the most monstrous among them start their operations. This is War Against Humanity, a subseries of World War II in real time. I'm Spartacus Olsson. In the last half of June 1942, we saw how the Japanese set up an extensive network of forced prostitution in the comfort stations throughout the Japanese Empire. In Assam, India, the refugees out of Burma were finally safe. The genocide of the Jews reached 1.5 million victims and continued unabated. The RAF, under the head of Bomber Command Arthur Harris, flew a third, fairly unsuccessful 1,000-bomber raid on Bremen. Overall, Harris has achieved far less than expected with these raids, and he has lost a total of 123 aircraft and several hundred airmen. Publicly, it's welcomed by the British as progress, long overdue retribution. But inside the RAF, the lack of effect and the use of half-trained air crews not yet ready for deployment is making him a target for heavy criticism. With losses at this rate, the RAF will soon deplete its training supply line and suffer decreased readiness across all operations. Harris wants to find a new way to continue, but the deteriorating military situation in the Pacific Rim colonies and North Africa now also threatens his plans to finish the war by simply bombing German civilians. In mid-June, South African Field Marshal Jan Smuts, who is advising the War Cabinet, urges British Prime Minister Winston Churchill to redirect bombers to North Africa instead in order to avert the developing disaster there. Harris is not pleased and writes to Churchill on June 17th. We ourselves are now at the crossroads. We are free, if we will, to employ our rapidly increasing air strength in the proper manner, in such a manner as would avail to knock Germany out of the war in a matter of months, if we decide upon the right course. If we decide upon the wrong course, then our air power will now, and increasingly in the future, become inextricably implicated as a subsidiary weapon in the prosecution of vastly protracted and avoidable land and sea campaigns. Now, we know from his own words that Churchill has become doubtful about the potential success of a sustained bombing campaign over Germany, regardless if it's targeting industry or civilians. As late as January this year, he said that he was skeptical of these cut-and-dried calculations, which showed infallibly how the war could be won by bombing. In the early days of the war, it had been said that if the Royal Air Force were allowed to launch an attack upon the Ruhr, they would, with preciseness and certitude, shatter the German industry. Careful calculations had been made to show that this could be done. After anxious thought, the attack was eventually made when the Germans invaded the Low Countries. There had only been a fractional interruption of work in the industries of the Ruhr. Doubts that have once again been reinforced. He is also under pressure from U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt to not deliberately target civilians. You see, the U.S. Army Air Force believe that they have a solution to the bombing issue that avoids breaking the laws of war. Use the Norton bomb sight to precision bomb only targets essential to the military with minimal collateral damage. Commander of the 8th Air Force, Major General Karl Spaatz, arrives in London now in early July to organize U.S. aerial support for the North African campaign and start working on joint operations in Europe. But Churchill is also under public pressure to wield retribution on the Germans for the Blitz. Last year, he clearly turned such demands down as impractical, saying that the British would have to stick it out. His words, not mine. In any case, on July 4th, Churchill strikes a compromise by discontinuing Operation Millennium after Bremen and allowing bombers to return to supporting the Atlantic War, but denying Smuts' request. With Spaatz on board, North Africa is handled anyway. He's acknowledging the voices inside the RAF who want the program stopped. In the eye of the public, there is no interruption, though. In a highly publicized raid on July 4th, U.S. Independence Day, the Americans joined the effort of bringing the war on the Germans. It is a raid by 12 Boston bombers, 6 from the 15th Bombardment Squadron and 6 manned by RAF crews on a series of airfields in occupied Netherlands. While 2 American and 1 British plane are downed and the raid doesn't do terribly much damage, no Dutch civilians are hurt. And while it looks like the Allies' strategic bombing war might be taking a new, less deadly direction after all, the Germans' genocide continues to pick up more steam, running in the same horrendous tracks. The 2 main methods for mass murder, gassing and shooting, intersect at the Yakovska concentration camp located on the outskirts of Lvov. It's a combined labor concentration and transit camp to deport Galician Jews to the extermination factory at Bevšić. But the SS also have thousands of Jews killed right here at the camp. In 1941, under the ideas of General Governor of the Generalgouvernement Hans Frank to first work the Polish Jews till they break and then kill them, Galicia was somewhat spared from the Einsatzgruppen's mass murder operations. Now that Jewish questions are firmly in the hand of the SS, who on the Führer's explicit request are hell-bent to kill all the Jews now, that has changed. On July 8th, roughly 7,000 Jews are shot and buried in a sandy ravine network outside of the camp. It is one of the many major actions in the camp this summer, which will see several tens of thousands of people disappear under the sandy dunes. At another combined concentration labor and now also extermination factory, Auschwitz, the death rates are also about to rise. Gassing began experimentally there in September last year. The first gas chamber, Crematory 1, is located in the Stammlager Auschwitz I and began operating already in the autumn of 1941. In March 1942, 2 more gas chambers inside a transformed large farm cottage began operation. The red brick building is formally called Bunker 1, but in the camp it is referred to as the Red House. Both Crematory 1 and the Red House respectively have a capacity to murder up to 800 people in each gassing. In June, Bunker 2, or the White House, due to the color of its plaster, was completed. It has 4 gas chambers of varying size with 2 doors for each chamber, while the Red House only has a single door per chamber. The 2-door system means that the gas can be expelled faster, the forced laborers clearing corpses can enter sooner, and the maximum rate of mass murder increases. The White House chambers can hold up to 1,200 people at once. On July 4th, all gas chambers are ready to operate at capacity to kill the majority of Jews, Sinti, and Roma arriving to Auschwitz by train, and those trains start arriving in ever shorter intervals. Those not killed immediately are the far fewer selected for slave labor or potentially something that might be even worse than being gassed to death. On July 7, 1942, Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler hosts a meeting to discuss the creation of a perfect human race. Present are SS General Richard Glücks, who oversees the concentration camp system, SS Gruppenführer and Generalleutnant of the Waffen-SS Karl Gebhardt, one of the leading SS medical doctors who treated Reinhard Heydrich before he died last month. By some accounts, Gebhardt is responsible for Heydrich's death by not following recommendations to administer the antibiotic sulfonamide to halt the spread of sepsis. The fourth party is gynecologist Karl Klauberg. Klauberg is a convinced Nazi racist theoretician, but also a pioneer of infertility treatment and hormonal research. These 4 have come together to discuss a new way of making humanity perfect. They want to make sure that presently live women of what they consider inferior races can be of use in labor and service to the master race, while making sure that they don't proliferate the race of lesser humans they belong to. In other words, stop them from giving birth to children, or, if you like, forced sterilization. To them, the concentration camps presents an unprecedented opportunity to research this idea. They will single out young, fertile Jewish women in concentration camps, including Auschwitz I, work out the best method by experimentation, and determine how many women they can make infertile how fast. 3 days after the meeting, the first group of 100 women is subjected to the first experiments. 2 Dutch doctors, both prisoners at the camp, described the 3 variants of sterilization experiments put to use. The first variant is performed by Professor Samuel, who was forced to do them, 3 to 4 operations per day. The abdomen was opened and an incision made in the uterus, whereupon neoplastic cells were implanted. The origin of these neoplastic cells is unknown. 3 to 6 operations were performed after this at 3 to 4 weekly intervals, and pieces of tissue from the uterus were taken and frozen sections made. The discharge which occurred through the cervix was clear and gave no indication of any change occurring. The women were unaffected by the actual operations. About the second variant, they write, 15 girls aged 17 to 18 years old. The subjects were placed in an ultra-shortwave field. 1 electrode was placed on the abdomen and another on the vulva. The rays were focused on the ovaries. The ovaries were consequently burnt up. Owing to faulty doses, several had serious burns of the abdomen and vulva. 1 died as a result of these burns alone. The others were sent to another concentration camp where some were put in hospital and others made to work. After a month, they returned to Auschwitz where control operations were performed. Sagittal and transverse sections of the ovaries were made. The girls altered entirely owing to hormonal changes. They looked just like old women. Often they were laid up for months owing to the wounds of the operations becoming septic. Several died as a result of sepsis. The third variant of experiments that was conducted most regularly by Dr. Klauberg himself, according to the Dutch doctors, goes like this. The women were put on the table. With the assistance of an electrically driven pump, a white cement-like fluid, possibly barium, was driven into the uterus. As the fluid was pumped in, Röntgen photos were taken. The women were extremely ill under this experiment. They felt as though the abdomen was going to burst. After getting up from the table, they rushed to the lavatory where the fluid came out again. The pains caused by this experiment were equivalent to labor pains. The fluid which was evacuated was often mixed with blood. The experiments were repeated several times. Those patients that could not be used owing to a small os uteri, or those patients upon whom the experiments were completed, were sent to Birkenau, another camp where they were killed. This was practiced on practically all women at Auschwitz, about 400 all told. We have arrived in a world where excruciating, painful suffocation by poisonous gas has become a lesser evil. Never forget.